23. Welcome to the Kingdom of Ask. Before I started out in sales, I was fascinated by techniques salespeople used to close deals. At the airport, I noticed books titled Secrets of Closing the Sale or The Art of Closing the Sale. At the bar, I heard friends who worked in sales brag about how they closed the deal. It all made it sound like closing is all there is in sales and that everything else salespeople are doing is of much less significance. I couldn't wait, once I got into the business, to finally take a look behind the curtain to learn how salespeople really get deals done, and I was expecting all kinds of hocus pocus. What I found was not much. I noticed pretty quickly that the most successful salespeople on the team spent much more time preparing for and focusing on the early stages of the sales process, on prospecting, connecting, and discovering. The last thing that was on their minds was trying to somehow trick a dream prospect into doing business with them. Closing seems like a misnomer anyway. It sounds like something is coming to an end, when in reality, it is the beginning of the client relationship. Closing sounds like something you're doing to buyers when you're actually working with them toward a mutual benefit. It also sounds like a one-time act, when it is so much more than that. So let's forget about closing. Instead, let's focus on asking. Not just asking for a final commitment at the end of the sales process, but also asking for mini commitments throughout the entire sales journey. Ask for the decision maker. Ask for the first meeting. Ask for permission to follow through with your meeting agenda. Ask for information during the discovery phase. Ask for an assignment. Ask for a budget. Ask for input to craft a customized solution. Ask for the proposal meeting. Ask for the order. Ask for the signed contract. You get the idea. You might have noticed that in the sales process framework we introduced at the beginning of the book, the ask phase is shown vertically and aligns with all other steps in the sales process. That's because sales champions ask for mini commitments at every phase. Always be asking. We've all heard the phrase always be closing. Let's change that to always be asking. Mini commitments require buyers to actively agree and follow through. They are the small steps on a long buying journey, and if done effectively, will get you to your destination, the sale. They are effective because each commitment means buyers are getting more and more invested emotionally and intellectually. Each commitment makes turning back harder for them. If you received many yeses throughout the sales process, asking for the order can actually feel like an anticlimactic formality, the natural outcome of taking buyers through your process. And it certainly doesn't require a special technique or an entire rehearsed script. Of course, if you miss getting all these prior commitments, asking for the final commitment will be by far the most challenging step in the sales process. You cannot move the final ask forward by skipping the asks that should have come before. It's you who must ask for the order. It's your job to keep the ball rolling, and your job to ask for the order directly and assertively. Your buyer will not do it for you. When you fail to ask for the order, you will fail. If you've done everything appropriately during the sales process up until this moment, you've earned the right to ask for this final commitment. Buyers know that you're a salesperson and you're meeting with them to eventually sell them something. It's not a secret. There's no reason to be uncomfortable asking for the commitments you need to help your prospects solve their challenges. If you have built enough trust in the process, this conversation should feel really natural. Keep your emotional discipline. The final ask can certainly be a little bit more nerve-wracking than all the other asks. After all, you've invested a lot of time and energy into the deal, and the last thing you want is for it to fall through in the final second. You might have even mentally allocated your commission dollars and maybe could win this month's sales contest if your buyer agrees to proceed. But if there is a time to keep your emotional discipline, this is it. Try to anticipate the anxiety that comes right before asking for the order. Visualize how the buyer agrees to your proposal and practice self-talk to manage your emotions. The good news is that the more deals you get done, the more you hear "I'm in" from a buyer, the easier it will be to ask for the order the next time around. That's the reason why salespeople typically close more, better deals at fewer discounts when they have already exceeded their quota for the quarter. Their confidence is higher and the perceived risk lower. If, on the other hand, their pipeline is empty and they desperately need a close to get anywhere near their quota, their anxiety will be higher. Assume your deal will close. When asking for the order, how you sound is at least as important as what you say. You have to come across as confident, strong, and in control of the process. Many sales pros do that by taking an assumptive position that then translate into the words they are actually saying. Here's what we are going to do. They're assuming the deal will proceed and acting accordingly. Sound natural, not scripted. You don't want to sound overly rehearsed, and that's why working off scripts during this stage of the sales process is not advisable, despite all the closing tips you can find in sales books. You need to have a very fluid back and forth conversation with the buyer, and following a pre-written script is more hindrance than help. Instead, the best salespeople weave the ask for the order very naturally into the conversation. This will work for you. Let's do it. I think we have a good plan in place. All we need to get started is your approval and a signed agreement. So why don't we go ahead and get this started? If this works for you, let's go ahead and get the contract drafted. Okay, let's lock this in now. Ask for long-term commitments. And while you're at it, try to push for a long-term commitment. What's the worst thing that can happen? The buyer won't agree to it, and you'll have to revert to a shorter contract length than planned. It's not ideal, of course, but it's also not the end of the world. Pushing for a longer-term commitment doesn't usually jeopardize the deal. If you ask, you get. If you don't, you won't, a colleague of mine used to say. The fact is, many buyers will absolutely consider a longer-term commitment, especially if they come with an additional incentive. In many situations, long-term is also better for the prospect. People like stability and hate change. It certainly is much better for you on many levels. A long-term contract completely changes the dynamic with the buyer. You're no longer a vendor who comes to beg for renewals every few months. Instead, you're a true resource to the client, a strategic partner that becomes an extension of their business. Long-term commitments are how lifelong client relationships are made. The fact that they also keep your competitors at bay is a nice side effect. Say nothing. Once you ask for the order, take a deep breath. Then, do and say nothing. Just wait and see what happens and watch the buyer closely. Doing nothing, of course, sounds very easy. It is not. After all, this is the most exciting part of your entire sales journey so far with the buyer. You will be tempted to elaborate, to over-explain, and potentially talk past the ask. Give the buyer space to think and to answer, and trust me, answer they will. The buyer says yes. They might answer in the affirmative. Congratulations, your bag of yeses, as a result of your asking for micro-commitments throughout the sales process, was full enough to lead to this result. Don't lose your composure now. Shake the buyer's hand and tell them how much you're looking forward to working together on the implementation of the program. Then define the next steps. Depending on the industry you are in and the size of the sale you made, these can be different things. A signed agreement that you brought to the proposal meeting, a contract that still needs to be drafted by your legal department and negotiated with the buyer and his legal team, a follow-up meeting with a third party that needs to be involved in the final evaluation and potentially final negotiation of the deal, like the purchasing department or a media agency, a payment in the form of a credit card payment, check, wire transfer, or digital payment. Especially in more complex negotiations, the follow-up document might be a letter of intent or a letter of understanding that captured what was agreed upon and states what still needs to be negotiated. After you agree on the next step with the buyer, leave. There's no reason to hang around. Your business is done for the time being, and the last thing you want is for the buyer to change his mind, even if only on some minor details. Say thank you and tell the buyer you will start executing the next step right away. The buyer has concerns. What if buyers don't say yes, though? What if they aren't ready to move forward with your proposal? As we have discussed, you need to actively draw out issues and questions the buyer might have throughout the presentation of your proposal. I'm deliberately using the term concern and not objection here, because if you have embarked on a sales journey with a buyer together, gone through all the motions and asks, followed your process, and involved the buyer in it, No buyer will suddenly and out of nowhere raise his hand and scream, "Objection," like a trial lawyer does in court. This absolutely happens at an earlier stage of the sales process when you're trying to connect with a buyer you don't know yet. But it shouldn't happen now. Buyers certainly can voice concerns about proceeding to the next step with a deal, though, and you will need to address them and bring the conversation to a mutually beneficial conclusion. First of all, stay calm. Dealing with concerns is part of your job. It's normal and shouldn't come as a surprise. That means you can prepare for it. What makes concerns a little different from the objections and dismissals we encountered during the connect phase of the sales process is that while there is a pretty finite list of potential objections and dismissals you need to anticipate when making a cold call, the potential list of concerns a buyer can have at this final stage of the sales process can be much longer. We love the idea, but won't have money for it until next year. I don't think I'm getting enough value. I like it, but I need to take it to the board. Your company was just in the news for lack of diversity. We're going to stick with what we have been using. I'm just not sure we'll be getting the results I need to get to show positive ROI. My colleagues saw some negative reviews of your product online. There are many, many more potential concerns. That means you can't have a script or a line ready at your fingertips for each one of them. Dealing with concerns. Most salespeople will push back instantly when their buyers voice concerns over the solution, trying to change their mind right then and there. As a result, what was a cordial business conversation can quickly turn acrimonious. You can't just shoot down a concern and expect the buyer to simply agree with your side of the argument. Others abandon their entire solution that they spent many hours brainstorming and building out way too quickly, only because of one minor concern by the buyer and because they want to avoid friction. Instead, your best strategy is to gather more information from the buyer. In Chapter 12, we introduced a framework on how to deal with real objections thrown at you while initially approaching prospects. This framework also works great for dealing with concerns at the end of the sales process, just with minor modifications, since you now have much more information about the company's challenges and goals than you had during your cold call. Again, you first sympathize and acknowledge that you heard the buyer's concern. This gives you a moment to gather your thoughts and to control your emotions. Then ask for overall buy-in to the proposal and concept you presented. This is necessary to establish that there isn't a much bigger issue with your proposal. Maybe you misunderstood something early in the sales process. Maybe things have drastically changed on the prospect's end that simply don't make your proposal feasible. You need to establish that before you move on. Buyer, I really need to think about this a little more before I commit. It's a big commitment. You, I get your concern. With a decision like this, it makes sense to think it through from all angles. Does the concept make sense to you, though? Do you like the idea? If your proposal is way off base, don't keep pushing for an order right now. Instead, offer to go back to the drawing board and schedule a follow-up meeting with them. If buyers tell you they like what you presented and are proposing, follow up with a couple of open-ended questions to clarify you understood the concern correctly and uncover more information about why the buyers have it. You need to know in as much detail as possible why the buyer's decision is currently set to no. Sometimes buyers are not always clear when they voice concerns, and some buyers can even be a bit dishonest about them. It is your job to cut through the smoke and mirrors. You also want to determine if the concern is the only one the buyer has at this moment, or if there are others. What's your main concern with what I showed you? What part of it don't you like? Based on what the buyer is telling you, your next move is to position your proposal in a way that addresses your buyer's concern. The best way to do that is by reminding buyers of the challenges they shared with you during the first meeting and how your proposal helps solve them. You're a business person here to help. You need to diplomatically bring across the point that if they keep their money, instead of giving it to you in exchange for your solution, they will also keep their problem. In our example, that means reminding them of what their current status quo is costing them or making them miss out on. If you did a thorough discovery job in the first meeting, you will even be able to back this up with numbers. Your ultimate goal is to maximize the benefit your proposal is delivering to the prospect while minimizing the importance of their voiced concern. Then ask for the order again, assumptively and confidently. Based on that, it doesn't seem to make sense to me to wait with the implementation. Every day you're losing is costing you. So why don't we go ahead and get our legal teams to draft the contract? Is this easy to do? No, sales is not easy, even if your friends think so. The buyer says no. Despite your best efforts, more often than not, you won't be able to alleviate the buyer's concerns, and your deal will not move forward. Many factors play into their decisions, and not all of them are in your control. Understand that the cards are stacked against you simply because the status quo is usually much more convenient for the buyer. It carries no potential disruption while shifting from one partner to another. There is no personal risk in being the one having championed the change internally. There will be no uncomfortable conversation with the current vendor, potentially a long-term partner of the company, and maybe even a friend of the buyer. The status quo is king, and kings are not easily toppled. If you do receive a clear no, make sure you at least get to an agreement with the buyer that what was turned down was not you and not the company you're working for, but your proposal, and your proposal alone. That keeps the door open for future opportunities. Thinking in Salesforce terms, you are only closing out an opportunity, not the lead. Once you're back at your office, debrief with your team. What are the lessons? Where did we fall short? What could we have done differently? What's the next step with this prospect? Your deal is stuck. You will run into situations where buyers seem interested, but despite your best attempts, won't give you the go-ahead. In other words, your deal is stuck. Sales champions prepare for this going into the proposal meeting and don't just shoot from the hip when a delayed decision causes trouble. Among the strategies they will consider are carving up the proposal into manageable chunks. Big concepts with big budgets are riskier for buyers and harder to get through the system. Start smaller with a smaller challenge and goal. Demonstrate that you are delivering results, then work your way up from there. We all would love to do the monster deal off the bat, but sometimes it's just not possible. Mark Hunter writes in High Profit Prospecting, never forego the first sale for the sake of landing the big sale. At least you have your foot in the door and can build a personal relationship with the decision maker. It will be logical for your buyer to give you more business if you do a good job. Offering to start working on deliverables, even if you don't have a final agreement yet. What does your timeline look like? Let's use the time between now and then to work on creative, should you decide to go forward. Creating urgency by leveraging demand on inventory and setting deadlines and rate expiration dates. Having a senior executive of your company reach out and offer to meet and become an executive sponsor for implementing the solution. If the buyer is telling you that your proposal needs to be reviewed and approved by additional people within their company, offer to be there. As you go over this with your team, there is no doubt they will have questions and maybe even concerns. I want to make sure that I'm here to address all the questions that come up. When is the meeting? Sometimes you will have to be patient and let things run their course. During this time, don't become another salesperson pestering the buyer by just checking in. Instead, while you await the decision on your proposal, provide value. Show them that you keep doing your homework and have another insight about their consumer or their competitors. Tell them that you have been thinking about their business and potential opportunities. In short, at least have some kind of relevant business reason for your follow-up. That's how you set yourself apart from the rest of the salespeople who are just calling to find out where we stand with our proposal. Are you okay? Even the best salespeople get ghosted by buyers, with all of their attempts to get in touch with them in vain. Eventually, you will have to change your tactics. What I've seen working is, after a while, to send an email with the core message of, "Are you okay?" Frame it as a very personal note, even implying that you are concerned for their health. A very similar tactic is to state in your email that you thought they were interested, but perhaps you misjudged the situation since you haven't gotten a response to any of your prior emails. Many balls that were stuck have started rolling again after messages like these, simply because buyers might have felt guilty about their lack of responsiveness. Even if they respond and tell you they are no longer considering your proposal, it is beneficial to you. At least you know where you stand and, if the prospect is worth pursuing further, can plan the next step. Case study. Asking Rebecca Jims for the order and dealing with their concerns. You. If this works for you, let's go ahead and get the contract drafted. Tracy. Not yet. I want to shop around a little bit more, so I can't give you my final decision right now. You. Got it. Never a bad idea to see what the marketplace has to offer. Does our campaign make sense to you, though? Do you like the idea of creating a Rebecca Jim's movement together with our female on-air personalities? Tracy, I like it a lot, actually. It's well thought out. You? So you really don't have any concerns about the proposal itself. It's really more about getting more market intel? Tracy, exactly. You? I'm just curious, what in particular are you trying to accomplish by opening this up to more companies? Tracy, it's really mostly due diligence. I want to make sure I will be getting the most bang for my buck. You? I promise I will work with you on the value we're delivering. You and I spoke about delivering a minimum of 1,500 trial memberships by December 31st. And you said that would be a massive success in that short period of time in a new market, correct? Tracy, yes, it definitely would be. You? Our campaign will deliver that for you. Tracy, you're only a few months away from your launch, and we still need to draft the contract, finalize the agreements with your spokespeople, come up with the right creative for the campaign, and of course, reserve the on-air and digital inventory, which, as you know, is in high demand for Christmas. And you told me the next few months will be the busiest you and your team will ever be. Tracy, Q4 will be a crazy time. I don't even want to think about it. You? Then let me help you by being the extended marketing arm that you will need. I can handle a lot of this. It seems to me that getting started with the execution of our campaign is better time spent than chasing a couple more salespeople for proposals that you most likely won't need and use. Tracy, you're right, I hadn't looked at it that way, but you have to work with me on the price. You? I will. In the meantime, why don't we go ahead and get our legal teams to start working on the contract? 24.